My name is Rachel, I'm 31 years old, and this is the story of how I went from believing in love so blindly that I nearly destroyed myself to finding a strength inside me I never knew existed. I don't tell this lightly because even now the memories sting. Even now I can close my eyes and hear his voice in my kitchen telling me, "We're a team, babe. Everything we do together." Those words were my lullaby for years. I built my life around them. I carved my identity around them, and I made sacrifice after sacrifice because I believed them. What I didn't realize at the time was that his definition of together meant me carrying the weight while he chased dreams that were built more on ego than substance. I met Jason when I was 24. I was fresh into my career in finance, excited about the independence of earning my own money, excited about the possibilities of life stretching out ahead. He was 3 years older, with messy brown hair, boyish charm, and a way of speaking that made ordinary things sound like extraordinary promises. We met at a friend's birthday party. I remember standing in the kitchen, balancing a red plastic cup in my hand, when I heard laughter from the corner. He was hunched over a napkin, scribbling something furiously while gesturing animatedly to two other guys. Curious, I walked over, and that was the first time I saw his sketches wireframes for an app he was convinced was going to change the way people managed their daily lives. Most people would have smiled politely and walked away, but not me. I listened, I asked questions, and when he looked at me with those eager eyes and said, "Finally, someone who gets it," I felt a spark ignite. We started dating soon after. I fell for his energy, his vision, his ability to see potential where others saw obstacles. He told me he admired my stability, that with me he felt grounded, and that together we could balance each other out, his passion and my practicality, his dreams and my discipline. When he proposed less than a year later, I didn't hesitate. I thought I'd found my partner in every sense of the word. What I didn't realize was that I wasn't signing up for a partnership. I was signing up to become a crutch. Jason had debt when we married, student loans, credit cards, remnants of failed business attempts. I told him it didn't matter. I was making decent money, we'd figure it out. "You're my anchor," he told me on our honeymoon. I thought it was romantic. Looking back, it was foreshadowing. Anchors don't just hold ships steady, they can also drag them down. The first year, it was almost fun. I'd come home from long days at the bank to find him surrounded by whiteboards, sketches, half-built prototypes. He'd talk for hours about his vision, and I would listen, believing that one day it would pay off. I covered rent, bills, groceries, everything, telling myself it was temporary. When my savings started to shrink, he assured me, "Just a little longer, babe. I'm this close," but this close stretched on endlessly. Months turned into years. My credit cards inched toward their limits. Nights were spent calculating how far my paycheck could stretch while Jason scribbled new ideas. Family dinners became tense. His parents would glance at me across the table, their whispers sharp. "She works too much," his mother once muttered when she thought I couldn't hear. Maybe if she supported him more emotionally, he'd succeed already. I wanted to scream. Support him more? I was carrying the both of us while he played entrepreneur, but I bit my tongue, because love makes you tolerate indignities you shouldn't. The exhaustion settled into my bones. I'd wake at 6, slog through 10-hour shifts, come home to a man who didn't even bother asking how my day was because he was too busy refining a pitch deck that no investor ever seemed to buy. And yet, every time I thought of confronting him, every time I thought of demanding more, I remembered the way he'd cup my face and whisper, "You'll see, Ratch. One day all of this will make sense." I wanted so badly for it to be true, but love isn't enough when it's one-sided. And the cracks began to show. It started small. A bar receipt tucked into his jeans pocket to $100 blown in one night. I convinced myself it was a client meeting, though he hadn't mentioned it. Then came the new shirts, brand names I knew he couldn't afford. When I asked, he waved it off. "An investor gifted me." That made no sense, but I swallowed it. Love makes you swallow lies. Like bitter pills, hoping the aftertaste won't linger, the fights grew sharper. One night he came home at midnight reeking of whiskey. "Where were you?" I asked softly. His eyes narrowed. "Why are you interrogating me? You think I'm out screwing around? You don't get it, Rachel. You don't get the pressure I'm under." He stormed off, leaving me standing in the hallway clutching my robe like armor. Later, I cried quietly into my pillow, ashamed for even asking. Gaslighting, they call it. Back then, I didn't know the term. I just knew that somehow, no matter what happened, I always ended up feeling like the unreasonable one. And then came the night everything changed. He left his laptop open on the kitchen counter. It was past midnight. I was putting away dishes, and the screen glowed with unread emails. My stomach twisted. I'd never snooped before, never wanted to. But something in me, that gnawing unease I'd tried to bury, pushed my hand toward the trackpad. I clicked, and my world shattered, thread after thread of emails between Jason and a man named Martin, someone I'd never heard of. At first, it was what you'd expect: pitches, updates, promises. But the more I scrolled, the colder my blood ran. My wife's salary has carried us so far, but once funding closes, I'll separate finances. She doesn't understand the business, but she's been useful for now. Useful. That word seared itself into my brain. Useful, like I was an appliance, a credit card, a tool, not a partner, not a human being who'd sacrifice sleep, health, pride, for his sake. And then the final blow. Once the round closes, I'll file for divorce. It's cleaner that way. She won't fight me on it, she's too soft. I read those lines until the words blurred. Divorce. He was planning to discard me the moment he no longer needed me. I don't remember closing the laptop. I don't remember walking to our bedroom. I remember sitting on the edge of the bed until the sun rose. Hollow, numb, shaking so hard my teeth chattered. Something broke inside me that night. Love curdled into rage. Trust splintered into shards that cut every time I breathed. But I didn't confront him. Not then. Confrontation would give him control, let him twist the narrative, paint me as hysterical. No, I told myself, if he thought I was soft, if he thought I'd go quietly, he was going to learn just how wrong he was. Revenge takes patience. And I was about to become the most patient woman alive. I woke up that morning with swollen eyes and a heart that felt like it had been scraped raw, but I forced myself to go to work as if nothing had happened. Sitting at my desk, staring at spreadsheets, I felt detached from my own body, like I was moving on autopilot. My coworkers chatted around me, phones rang, papers shuffled, and I just kept hearing that one line over and over in my head. She's been useful for now. It looped endlessly until it stopped sounding like English and became a drumbeat of humiliation. When I got home that night, Jason was on the couch, laptop balanced on his knees, muttering about pitch decks. He looked up and smiled casually, the way someone smiles at a waitress or a stranger holding open a door, practiced, polite, utterly devoid of intimacy. I felt my stomach twist, but I smiled back. That was when I knew my performance had begun. If he thought I was soft, then I would play soft. If he thought I wouldn't fight, then I would lull him into believing that until it was too late. Over the next few weeks, I became an actress. I cooked his favorite meals, I asked about his meetings, I even rubbed his shoulders when he complained of stress. All the while, I was quietly gathering evidence. Late at night, when he snored beside me, I'd slip into the living room with my phone and take photos of his emails, his bank statements, his notes. I found evidence of him siphoning money into a hidden account, small transfers that added up to thousands. I found messages to investors bragging about his sacrifices, rewriting history so that he appeared as the hardworking visionary and I as the complacent housewife who didn't get it. The gall of it made my hands shake, but I forced myself to be methodical. I reached out to a lawyer, not just any lawyer, but a college friend named Lauren who specialized in corporate disputes. Over coffee, I spilled everything. She listened, expression hardening, and finally said, "Rachel, if what you're telling me is true, you have more leverage than you think. If you've been financially supporting him, you have a claim to marital assets and potentially to the company. But you'll need proof, and you'll need to be strategic. The word lit something inside me. For years I had been reactive, scrambling to keep us afloat while Jason chased whims. Now it was my turn to plan. I kept collecting evidence. I created a folder on a hidden drive, meticulously organized. Every receipt, every bank transfer, every email screenshot. I backed it up in cloud storage under a random file name in case he got suspicious. I even recorded a few of his phone calls when he slipped up and left them on speaker. In one, he told Martin, "She thinks I'm almost there. She has no idea I'm already planning my exit." My stomach nodded as I listened, but I saved it. Each piece of betrayal became a weapon in my arsenal. Meanwhile, I kept up the act. I laughed at his jokes. I offered to proofread his slides. I told him I believed in him, and he relaxed. He thought he had me wrapped around his finger, blind and docile. He had no idea I was waiting, biding my time. Then one evening, opportunity knocked. Jason came home buzzing with excitement. He had secured a meeting with a major investor, someone who could write the kind of check that would finally take his startup from dream to reality. He paced the living room, gesturing wildly, talking about how this was it. This was the moment he'd been waiting for. And all I could think was, yes, this is the moment I've been waiting for too. I told him I'd come to the meeting to support him, and he didn't object. Why would he? In his mind, I was harmless, the supportive wife who knew her place. The morning of the meeting, I dressed carefully in a sleek navy dress, my hair neatly tied, my face calm. Jason barely noticed, too, busy rehearsing his pitch aloud. We arrived at the high-rise conference room, the city skyline gleaming through glass walls. Martin was there, along with two other potential investors. Jason launched into his spiel, striding confidently, waving his arms as he spoke about market disruption and user acquisition. I sat quietly, hands folded, waiting for the right moment. It came when one of the investors asked about financial sustainability. Jason rattled off projections, but I interrupted softly. "If I may," I said. All eyes turned to me. Jason blinked, clearly irritated, but I smiled pleasantly. "I think it's important to acknowledge the foundation this company was built on. After all, without years of financial support, none of this would exist." Silence. Jason's face flushed. "Rachel," he hissed through clenched teeth, "this isn't the time," but I ignored him. I pulled out a slim folder I'd tucked into my bag and slid it across the table. "In fact, here are records of the personal funds I contributed, covering everything from rent to prototype expenses. You'll also find email correspondence where Jason outlined his plan to divorce me once funding came through." The investors exchanged glances. Martin picked up the folder, flipping through, his face darkening. Jason stammered, reaching across the table, but one of the investors held up a hand. "Is this true?" he demanded. Jason sputtered, "She's exaggerating. But I cut him off. Calm, measured, deadly. "I have digital copies, recordings, bank statements. This is just the beginning." The room turned cold. Jason's confidence drained from his face. The investors, once leaning in with interest, now leaned back, eyes sharp with suspicion. The meeting ended abruptly, Jason chasing after them, babbling excuses, but the damage was done. That night, he came home seething. "What the hell were you thinking? You ruined everything." I stood in the doorway, arms crossed. For once, I didn't shrink. "No, Jason. You ruined everything the moment you decided I was disposable. I just made sure you didn't get to profit off me while doing it." He blustered, threatened, begged, cycled through every stage of desperation. But I was unmoved. With my lawyer's guidance, I filed for divorce, armed with evidence that left him with nothing to stand on. The investors pulled out, his reputation tanked, and word spread quickly in the small startup community. No one wanted to touch a man known for betraying both his wife and his backers. In the end, he lost everything. And me? I walked away not just with my share of assets, but with my dignity intact, with the quiet satisfaction of knowing that the man who thought I was too soft to fight had been destroyed by the very softness he underestimated. Even now, when I think back on those years, I marvel at how blind I was. But I don't regret it anymore, because if I hadn't been blind, I never would have learned how sharp I could be when my eyes finally opened. After the divorce papers were filed, Jason tried everything he could to salvage control. He called me incessantly, his tone swinging wildly between anger and pleading. One day, he left me a voicemail where he screamed, "You're destroying my life." The very next day, another message came in soft, broken. "Rachel, we can fix this, please, I love you." But those words had lost all meaning. They were hollow, rusted echoes of a time when I believed him. I saved the voicemails, though. Evidence. My lawyer said. Every outburst, every manipulation, every slip of the mask was another nail in the coffin of his credibility. At work, I carried myself as if nothing had happened, but inside I was learning who I was again. People noticed I smiled less, that I had shadows under my eyes, but no one knew the storm I was navigating. At night, I sat in the apartment alone, surrounded by silence that felt heavier than any words could. Yet, strangely, that silence began to feel like freedom. No more waiting for him to stumble in at midnight, no more forcing a smile when he boasted about our future. The quiet was mine, and it grew less lonely with each passing day. Jason's downfall spread faster than I could have imagined. In the startup world, reputation is everything. Word of what happened leaked through whispers at networking events, through investors who warned others, through colleagues who connected the dots. His name became synonymous with unreliability, a man who bit the hand that fed him. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he tried pitching to new backers, but doors slammed shut before he could finish introductions. Once, I saw him across the street in the financial district, shoulders hunched, hair unkempt, muttering into his phone. He didn't see me, but I watched for a moment, realizing I felt nothing. No anger, no love, no grief, just nothing, and that nothing was powerful. Meanwhile, my own life began to shift. I had spent so long being the background character in someone else's story, the supporting act to Jason's endless monologue, that I had forgotten what it meant to dream for myself. Slowly, I remembered. I took extra projects at work, not out of necessity but because I wanted to. My boss praised my diligence. One afternoon, he asked if I'd considered moving into strategy. It was like someone opening a window in a room I didn't know was stifling me. For years, I'd poured energy into Jason's fantasy. Now I had the chance to invest in my own reality. I moved into a smaller apartment closer to the office. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. Every item inside belonged to me, chosen by me, paid for with money I earned. No ghost of Jason lingered there. The first night I slept on my new bed, I lay awake listening to the hum of traffic outside and smiled for no reason at all. For the first time in years, I felt light. Jason, however, wasn't finished trying to drag me down. He filed motions claiming I had sabotaged his business out of spite. He tried painting himself as the victim of a bitter ex-wife, but my lawyer dismantled every argument with the evidence I had collected. Receipts, emails, recordings, each one a blade that cut through his lies. Judges don't take kindly to men who siphon money from their wives and plot divorces behind their backs. Case after case crumbled in my favor. He lost credibility not only with investors, but with the court. Months passed. Divorce was finalized. I received my fair share of assets, more than Jason had ever intended to give me, and I walked away with enough security to start over. Yet revenge wasn't just about money. It was about reclaiming my voice, my story, and that part of the victory was harder to measure but infinitely sweeter. One evening, Nearly a year after the divorce, I ran into his sister at a coffee shop. We had never been close. She always defended Jason, always looked at me like I was the obstacle to his greatness. But that day, her eyes softened. "Rachel," she said quietly, "I didn't know how bad it was." "I'm sorry," I nodded, accepting her words, though I didn't need them anymore. I wasn't living for his family's approval. Still, it was strange to hear acknowledgement, even late. I realized then that revenge had ripples. It wasn't just Jason who felt the impact. It was everyone who had enabled him, everyone who had believed his version of events without question. They saw him differently now, not as a visionary but as a fraud. And me? I wasn't invisible anymore. Life moved forward in small, steady steps. I traveled for the first time in years, a solo trip to Italy where I walked through cobblestone streets, sipped espresso in quiet cafes, and remembered how to be curious again. I sat by the sea and wrote in a journal, filling page after page with thoughts I had silenced for too long. The salt air felt like a baptism, washing away the residue of his lies. Sometimes, late at night, memories returned: the nights I cried in secret, the mornings I dragged myself out of bed despite the weight in my chest. Those memories stung, but they also reminded me of the woman I had been and the woman I had become. I had been soft, yes, but not weak. There is a difference. Softness bends, weakness breaks. I bent until I learned to stand, and when I stood, I did not fall again. Jason faded into the background of my life, like a bad dream dissolving with daylight. I heard rumors now and then: a failed partnership, a cheap rental where he lived alone, the occasional drunken outburst in a bar. But I didn't seek them out. He had become irrelevant to me. My revenge was not only that he lost, but that I no longer cared whether he won or lost. His downfall was permanent. My freedom was permanent. Years later, when I looked back, I realized the most shocking part of my story wasn't his betrayal. Betrayal is common. People lie, people cheat, people use. What shocked me was my own transformation. I had been the woman who believed in fairy tales, who poured herself out for someone else's dream. And I became the woman who dismantled a liar in front of his investors, who built a life on her own terms. That arc, that journey, was the true victory. So if you ask me now, was it worth it? The nights of exhaustion, the tears, the humiliation? No, I wouldn't wish that on anyone. But do I regret what I did with it? Do I regret sharpening my pain into a weapon and using it to cut myself free? Not for a second. Because in the end, revenge wasn't about destroying Jason. It was about rebuilding Rachel, and Rachel is stronger than Jason ever imagined. In the months after everything came crashing down, I noticed how different the air felt in my lungs. It sounds strange, but even the act of breathing felt freer, as if for years I had been drawing air through a straw and suddenly someone had taken it away. I began noticing small things again. The way the sunlight hit my kitchen counter in the morning, the quiet joy of cooking dinner for myself without waiting for someone to come home and devour it without a thank you. The peace of falling asleep without wondering when the front door would creak open. But healing wasn't linear. Some nights I woke up drenched in sweat, dreaming of arguments that had never happened but might as well have. In those dreams, Jason always looked triumphant, always smug, as if mocking me for having believed him for so long. I would sit up in bed, chest pounding, reminding myself he was gone, reminding myself that he no longer had a claim on me. Slowly, the nightmares became less frequent, the mornings brighter. Work became an anchor of a healthier kind. I poured myself into it, not out of desperation but out of pride. My diligence didn't go unnoticed. Within a year, I was offered a promotion into a strategic role. I hesitated at first, worried about the weight of responsibility, but then I thought about how I had carried Jason's entire life on my back for years. Compared to that, this was nothing. I accepted, and for the first time in a long time, I felt excited about the future. I kept in touch with Lauren, the lawyer who had guided me through those dark days. We'd meet occasionally for drinks, and She would shake her head and say, "You don't even realize how strong you are, Rachel." I didn't feel strong, not always, but I began to recognize the truth in her words. Strength isn't loud. Sometimes it's quiet, stubborn survival until you can finally stand tall again. Jason tried to claw his way back into relevance. He attempted smaller ventures, little apps and projects, but the community had turned its back on him. He sent me a letter once, handwritten, pages and pages of half apologies and half accusations. I read the first paragraph and tossed it in the trash. I didn't need his words anymore. They had poisoned me long enough. Instead, I wrote my own. Journals filled with reflections, goals, fragments of dreams I had silenced. I realized how much I loved writing, how therapeutic it felt to put my pain into sentences and watch it transform into something outside of me. One evening, on a whim, I shared a short essay online about rebuilding after betrayal. To my surprise, people responded. Messages poured in from strangers who said they saw themselves in my story, that my words gave them hope. I hadn't expected that. It lit a fire in me. Maybe my story wasn't just mine. Maybe it could be a lantern for others still stumbling in the dark. Life didn't become perfect. Nothing ever is. There were still lonely evenings, still moments when memories stung like old scars. But there was also laughter again. I reconnected with friends I had drifted from, people Jason had subtly discouraged me from seeing because they distracted me from supporting him. They welcomed me back without judgment, and slowly I rebuilt a circle that felt like family. One of those friends invited me to a hiking trip. At first, I resisted. Jason had always hated the outdoors, and I had convinced myself I did too. But I went, and standing on a mountain trail, looking out over a valley bathed in golden light, I felt small in the best possible way. Small but free. I realized then that Jason had shrunk my world down to the size of his ego, and now I had the whole horizon back. It's been years now, but telling this story still makes my chest tighten. I think that's the truth of betrayal. It never leaves you entirely, but neither does resilience. The woman I was back then, the one who cried herself to sleep, who believed in empty promises, she still lives inside me. And I honor her, because without her sacrifices, I wouldn't have learned the value of my own strength. If Jason were to see me now, I don't think he'd recognize me. Not because I've changed completely, but because he never truly saw me in the first place. He saw what I could provide, not who I was. And that is his greatest failure. He lost the chance to know the woman I became, a woman who will never again be reduced to useful. Sometimes people ask me if I regret marrying him. I used to say yes without hesitation, but now my answer is more complicated. If I hadn't married him, I wouldn't have suffered so deeply. But if I hadn't suffered, I wouldn't have grown. I wouldn't have discovered that revenge is not just about destroying someone else, but about rebuilding yourself from the ashes they tried to bury you in. Jason's story ended in whispers, a man who could have been something but chose the path of arrogance and deceit. My story is still being written, and that, more than anything, is the sweetest revenge. After the dust had settled and the court had finalized everything, I found myself standing at the edge of a new life, one that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. Freedom isn't always a neat ribbon tied around your wrist. Sometimes it's a gaping horizon, and you have to figure out which way to walk. For the first few weeks, I felt restless. I woke early, made coffee, sat by my window, and stared at the city moving outside, wondering what my next chapter would look like. I had money in my account now, not a fortune, but enough. Enough to breathe, to plan, to imagine something without the constant worry of how Jason would drain me next. Yet money wasn't the true prize. The true prize was the silence of not being belittled, not being manipulated, not being treated like a tool. That silence was worth more than every cent, but freedom doesn't erase pain overnight. There were still days I questioned myself. Was I too harsh? Could I have done something differently? I'd catch myself tracing those questions in my mind, like grooves in old wood. Then I would replay the words I read on his screen. she's been useful for now. And just like that, my spine would stiffen again. No, I had done what I needed to survive, what I needed to reclaim myself. Work continued to be my anchor. I dove deeper into strategy, found satisfaction in solving problems, in leading projects, in being seen as competent and respected. Every praise from my boss felt like a tiny patch sewn over the holes Jason had ripped in me. Slowly, my confidence became something sturdier, something I owned. Outside of work, I rebuilt piece by piece. I reached out to old friends, the ones Jason had dismissed as distractions. To my surprise, they welcomed me back with warmth instead of resentment. We went for brunches, long walks, even silly karaoke nights. One evening, over margaritas, my friend Clara grabbed my hand and said, "You're glowing, Ratch. You don't even realize it, but you are." I laughed, shaking my head, but inside something fluttered. Glow, a word I hadn't associated with myself in years. Travel became another form of therapy. I booked trips I'd once only daydreamed about. Italy first, then Greece, then a quiet week in the mountains where I hiked until my legs ached and my lungs burned with clean air. Every step away from home felt like a step away from the version of me who had been trapped in Jason's shadow. On those trips, I learned to sit alone in cafes without feeling awkward, to strike up conversations with strangers, to find joy in solitude instead of fear. Jason, meanwhile, became a ghost. I still heard whispers about him: failed ventures, burned bridges, drunken outbursts. Once, an acquaintance told me he'd been spotted trying to pitch a new idea in a dingy bar, only to be laughed out of the room. I listened politely, but inside I felt nothing. He was like a storm that had passed. The wreckage was mine to clean, but the thunder no longer scared me. One unexpected twist came when Martin, the investor he'd courted, reached out to me months later. He requested a meeting. Curious, I agreed. We met in a quiet coffee shop, and after some small talk, he leaned forward. "Rachel, I owe you an apology. I didn't see the truth until you put it in front of me. You saved me from losing a great deal of money." He paused, then added, "If you ever have a business idea of your own, I'd like to hear it." The words startled me. Me? I had never thought of myself as an entrepreneur. For years, I had only been the silent financier behind someone else's dream. But Martin's offer planted a seed. On my trips and my journals, ideas began to sprout. What if I created something of my own? Not for validation, not for revenge, but for me? I didn't rush into it, but I began sketching concepts, researching, learning. It wasn't about building an empire. It was about proving to myself that I could be more than the support role I had been cast in. Each small step: signing up for a workshop, attending a networking event, drafting a business plan, felt like reclaiming territory Jason had stolen from me. Years passed, and my life unfolded in ways I couldn't have predicted. I grew into my career, nurtured friendships, traveled, explored new passions. I even fell in love again, carefully, cautiously, with someone who valued partnership in the truest sense. He listened. He asked questions. He celebrated my successes instead of resenting them. And for the first time, love didn't feel like sacrifice. It felt like balance. But even as happiness returned, I never forgot the lessons Jason taught me. Betrayal had been a brutal teacher, but a thorough one. I learned to trust my instincts, to set boundaries, to demand reciprocity. I learned that softness is not weakness, that kindness must be paired with discernment, and that love without respect is poison. Looking back, I sometimes wonder how I endured as long as I did. How did I keep going when the weight of his lies pressed so heavily on me? The answer, I think, is that hope is both a blessing and a curse. Hope kept me afloat, but it also chained me. It wasn't until I replaced false hope with self-belief that I finally broke free. Jason's name occasionally surfaces, usually in hushed tones, as a cautionary tale. But to me, he is nothing more than a chapter I've closed. My revenge wasn't in his downfall, though watching him crumble was undeniably satisfying. My true revenge was in living well, in becoming someone he could never diminish again. So this is my story. A story of love turned sour, of betrayal sharp enough to cut, of revenge meticulously planned and executed. But more than that, it is a story of rebuilding, of finding myself in the wreckage, of realizing that I was never just useful, I was, and always will be, the author of my own life, and that, more than any courtroom victory or investor humiliation, is what makes this ending mine.